again. Lesson 1.8, early psychology. It's a good song, little nerd rock, right? This is nerd rock. The group is Rush. The song is called Free Will. We're going to get a little tie-in to the lesson here, obviously, in a minute. Rush, great Canadian band. Sounds like it has a female lead singer. It's a guy named Geddy Lee. It's actually a man. Very high-pitched voice, though. One of the greatest drummers in history, Neil Peart, was the drummer of Rush. Highly recommended for you to check out. They're not my favorite, but people swear by them, right? Some people are just totally freaking in love with Rush. We are coming at you today with lesson 1.8. Like I said, we're going to take a look at a timeline of psychology. There are some psychologists that are obviously inspirational to the field of psychology, many of whom you've heard of. You've probably heard of a guy named Freud. Just guessing, right? But you've probably heard of a guy named Freud. But some of these psychologists maybe you haven't heard of, or you've heard of them in a different way and you didn't realize the contribution that they made to psychology. Let's see, we're going to pick up way back around 400 BCE. Now, I'm a history teacher. I like using BCE. You guys at home, you've got that Judeo-Christian upbringing that we find familiar in this area, so you probably just refer to it as before Christ. BCE is before Common Era, okay? And we are reaching back into that BC time period to look at the origins of early psychology and the guys that had a big influence on modern psychology. And the first dude we're going to run into is good old Socrates up here. Who? Socrates? Oh, no. Not Socrates. It's Socrates. But, of course, in the great movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they referred to him as Socrates. So let's check out a little clip. We'll probably break copyright infringement law here, but I don't care. Let's go for it. This is from the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Oh, I gotta make that go away before I can press play, apparently. See, struggling. There's good old Bill and Ted.
Socrates.
And Bill says it right the first time.
We know that name. Yeah. Hey, look him up. Oh, it's under Socrates.
Uh-oh.
Oh, yeah.
Ted screwed it up. It's not Socrates, it's Socrates.
Socrates. The only true wisdom consists in knowing that you know nothing.
Ah.
That's us, dude.
That's definitely them. They know nothing.
Let's bag them. Yeah.
So, the only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. Now, how does that relate to psychology? Let's check it out over here. Coming back over here. Socrates came up with exactly what Bill and Ted just taught us, this idea of Socratic wisdom. That is, you need to know what you don't know. That's the greatest wisdom one can possess, is knowing what they don't know, or being able to admit that they don't know everything. And so we see some pretty major sort of modern psychological terms stem from this idea of the Socratic wisdom, which is also a little bit loosely tied into scientific method. If you can make that jump in your head, I'm sure you're capable of doing that at your age and with your knowledge of scientific method, probably not just in psychology, but you learned it in science, you learned it in social studies, right? And knowing what you don't know is a big piece of the scientific method as well. But check out these psychological terms that sort of stem from that Socratic wisdom. I'm going to start over here with cognitive dissonance, because that really sort of gets to the heart of the matter. Cognitive dissonance, is the idea that your brain literally becomes stressed when it is confronted with new information, or information that goes against everything that we always thought that we knew, our values. Okay, and I'm just going to give you an example of this stress that you might be able to relate to. let's say you got a little dog, right? Everybody loves a little dog, but little dogs are annoying because you know what? You got to take little dogs for walks. And when you take little dogs for walks, they like to do their business on other people's lawns. And so what most of us have learned to do, because our values in our society are such, right? Our values have taught us for a long time to clean up after our messes. We start learning it when we're young, and that message stays with us all the way through, trying to pick up little Fido's mess when he does his business on somebody else's lawn. And we value that as a society. You don't want to get caught not picking up little Fido's mess. And so your whole life, you walk around with that little bag in your back pocket, walking your dog, and when your dog does his business, you pick up after them. Well, let's say one day, right? Let's say one day I'm going to encounter some new information. Little Fido goes on the neighbor's lawn, and I reach into my back pocket, and I have no plastic bag. What am I going to do? But in that moment, that causes great distress and stress in our brain, right? That new piece of information that we're confronted with that kind of goes against our value system and everything that we've ever done, it really does cause us stress. We might find ourselves embarrassed. We might find ourselves angry. We're going to have some type of visceral emotional response given that new information that goes against our values and everything that we thought we ever knew. And we might even find ourselves disappointed that we forgot that bag that day. Now, that's a super, super simple concept, right? Like the forgetting the doggy bag to clean up after Fido. But let's apply this on a greater scale, right? Anytime, our brains are basically built in a way, psychologically, where we don't like to admit that we don't know stuff. Okay? And our brain works really hard to avoid that stress of cognitive dissonance. And that leads to some other things happening, right? As our brain tries to oftentimes convince ourselves that we have much more wisdom than we really have. Confirmation bias is another one that we hear a lot lately, especially with all the news channels that we have offered. When I was a kid, there was only 3 news channels. You got your news from those 3 spots. Nowadays, we have hundreds of news channels at our disposal. There's tons of online magazine type, web pages that offer the news. There's lots of news channels that offer the news. There's hundreds of newspapers that offer the news. And we can go and we can grab whatever information we want because there's tons of news sources at our disposal. Confirmation bias is the idea that our brain, in an effort to avoid cognitive dissonance, right? We don't want to admit that we were wrong about something. We don't want that stress of encountering new information that we're not used to processing. And so our brain actively seeks out information that confirms our thoughts, even if they're incorrect, and our values, even if they don't make sense, right? And we seek out those sources of information that make us feel like we were correct. Socrates would say, we don't know what we don't know in those cases, right? We're not willing to admit that we don't know something. We're much more apt to find information that proves that we do know something and makes us feel like we know something. So that's the idea of confirmation bias. And this final sort of modern psychological term that stems out of the same sort of ideas of confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance, which kind of are tied closely to the Socratic wisdom, is this idea of illusory correlation. Sometimes we imagine there's a relationship between things that doesn't actually exist, right? Hopefully, it's not somebody that you like in school. Like, hey, I think that person's into me, and then that relationship really doesn't exist. I mean, that can happen too, right? I think we've all been there. But imagining a relationship between 2 variables, and we go, oh yeah, these 2 things connect, but really they don't. And I'll give you a popular one, right? This is kind of like an opinion. Sometimes I offer an opinion. I think one example of illusory correlation might be between gun ownership and gun crime. We imagine that in a country like the United States with a large percentage of gun ownership, we imagine that gun crime has got to be like some disproportionately high number because we have such a disproportionately high number of gun owners in this country. And in fact, that relationship doesn't actually exist. Now, we could draw a positive correlation between other things, right? But it is an illusion that gun ownership creates gun crime. Further research might find that there are positive correlations. For instance, there is a positive correlation between gun ownership and the percent of homicides that are committed by gun, right? So if I have the wherewithal to possess a gun and I actually wanted to commit homicide, it is more likely I'm going to commit homicide with a gun if I had access to guns, right? So that is actually a positively correlated relationship. But the idea that gun ownership itself relates or somehow translates to more gun crime is not actually the case. All right, so there's some examples there. We got to know what we don't know. You can't be jumping, I guess we would normally call illusory correlation. We might term it as jumping to conclusions, right? We can't be jumping to conclusions. We can't be finding information that just reinforces what we think is true, right? We shouldn't even really be experiencing stress because we've encountered some sort of new information or something out of the ordinary has happened. We shouldn't let that stress us out. Okay, we got to know what we don't know. So that's Socrates, his contribution to modern psychology. Then down here, another ancient Greek, Aristotle, student of Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates. They were like, just building on each other's ideas. And Aristotle comes up with this idea of your brain is a blank slate. When you're born, Aristotle believed that your mind was like empty. A totally blank slate. Now, we're going to have further research in our psychology class where we debate whether these things are actually true, and we'll find that Aristotle's a little bit off the mark on that. But for being like, philosophizing about this stuff 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, he actually was onto some good stuff, though. He believed that your mind was sort of empty like a blank slate, and that allowed for free will. Now, free will is a concept in psychology that we're going to discuss all throughout the course, right? Do humans have free will? Do we make our own decisions? Or is there something else that's sort of driving us to make our decisions for us and we can't really control it? So this idea of free will is going to be a hot topic, and Aristotle was onto it, 2,500 years ago. He said yes. Right? Aristotle said, we can make of life whatever we want, right? We have the ability to control our own decisions. We have the ability to control our behaviors, and we can make of our lives what we want. And this is a big, big driving force in what modern psychologists would say is nurture, right? The nature versus nurture argument. And Aristotle really drove this nurture argument in a big way. He basically said that everything we gain in life is through our own experiences. And you've probably heard like mom and dad say that, like, well, we got to let him make his own mistakes so that he can learn, right? And that is Aristotle's nurture argument in a nutshell, right? We all have the capacity to learn, and we need to learn through our own experiences. That's it. That's the early Greek contributions to modern psychology. Thanks for tuning in. Adios.